This webinar is recorded and made available in an accessible alternative format upon request. If you require captioning, transcription, or other communication services to access this webinar, please contact Disability Resource Center at drc@snhu.edu or 877-591-4723. Select option 4. This video is a continuation of the mylab problem 2.43. In our first video, we saw how to take the journal entries from mylab and prepare them in Excel, just like you'll do in the final project. In this video, we'll do the T accounts, prepare a trial balance, and prepare financial statements from those transactions. Your T accounts from your mylab problem look like this. Let's see how you'll do the same thing in Excel. You want to start with the journal entries you prepared in Part 1. Here's a tip. Print out your journal entry page so that you can mark off each entry as you transfer it to the T accounts. Next, go to your T accounts page in the same workbook we used for our journal entries. We'll adapt this one for the accounts we have in the mylab problem. Here is our T account page adapted for the accounts that we have in Problem 4 in mylab. In our first journal entry, we debit cash and credit common stock for $25,000. For our T accounts, we put the date in the date column, $25,000 in the debit column for the T account cash. Then we go to the common stock T account, put the date in the date column, and $25,000 in the credit column. We can look at our next two journal entries and how they transfer to T accounts. The requirement is pretty easy. Find the appropriate accounts, put the debits on the debit side, and the credits on the credit side. Now that you've seen how to enter each transaction into the T accounts, let's see how the accounts look after the entries have been entered. I completed the transfer of the remaining transactions. The next thing we do is add each column, then calculate the total balance at the end of the period for each account. Let's take a look at the cash account. Our debit column is $30,100. Our credit column is $4,690. Subtracting the credits from the debits, we end with a debit cash balance of $25,410. We do this for each account. Be sure to check your math. The next requirement of the mylab problem tells you to prepare the trial balance. The trial balance you prepared in mylab looks something like this. In the final project, you do a trial balance as part of the trial balance worksheet in steps 5 and 7. Here's what that page looks like in the project workbook. Here I've taken the same file and changed the accounts to match our mylab problem. I blocked out the other columns that we aren't using for this problem. So let's get started with our trial balance. To complete the trial balance, we take the totals from our T account page, which I inserted on the right, and transfer those balances to the accounts on the trial balance. As we transfer the balances, we then add the debit column and the credit column to make sure they balance. At the bottom, you'll see the totals that show that our debits and credits balance. Here's a side-by-side comparison between what you did in mylab on the right and how the trial balance looks in Excel on the left. The remaining requirements we'll convert to Excel are the preparation of the financial statements. Our mylab income statement looks like this. We can replicate that income statement using the Step 8 income statement page of our project workbook. Using our balances from our trial balance, we take the revenues and expenses and use them to create our income statement. We use service revenue, rent expense, and utilities expense. But what about unearned revenue? Isn't that a revenue account that belongs in the income statement? No. Remember that prepaid expenses and unearned revenues are balance sheet accounts, not income statement accounts. We next move to the statement of retained earnings. This is the statement of retained earnings you prepared in MyLab. We'll take these same accounts to create our statement in Excel. We can use the Step 8 Statement of Retained Earnings tab from our project workbook to prepare an Excel version of our statement. The retained earnings statement is pretty easy. We take our beginning retained earnings. In this case, we have no beginning retained earnings, so we have a 0. We add our net income from our income statement, subtract our dividends from our trial balance, and we get our ending retained earnings at the end of the period. The period can be a month, a quarter, and even a year. In our final project, our period is a quarter. In our MyLab, our period was a month. Our last statement from the MyLab problem is the balance sheet. The balance sheet contains our assets, liabilities, and equity accounts. This is the completed balance sheet from our MyLab problem. We'll use the Step 8 balance sheet from our final project workbook to do our Excel version. Using our trial balance, we can fill out our assets, liabilities, and equity accounts. What about retained earnings? Those aren't on the trial balance. Where did that number come from? That came from our statement of retained earnings that we just did in our previous step. And what about the accounts crossed out on the balance sheet or on the trial balance? Why aren't they on the balance sheet? It's because those accounts were on our income statement and our statement of retained earnings. One more thing, notice on the balance sheet that the total assets equal the total liabilities and stockholders' equity. If the two do not match, you've done something wrong. Look at any differences to try to figure out where your mistake is. We're now at the end of our video. Remember these important takeaways. When doing the final project, print out your answers from your MyLab to use as examples. Print out your journal entries and check off each entry as you enter it into the T accounts. Make sure your trial balance debits and credits total to the same amount. Each trial balance account goes on only one statement. See page 71 of the text for a partial list of which accounts go on the income statement and which go on the balance sheet. This will help you when you're doing your final project. Thanks for watching. Please let your instructor know if you have any questions at all.